Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats solo edition again. Hello, everyone. This is producer JL coming at you again with what could probably be the last solo podcast of the year because guess what? Hockey is here. The Rangers just released their training camp roster this week, and players are back on the ice. Videos are coming out of players doing workouts, and interviews are being done. And ladies and gentlemen, hockey is back. So they released the training camp roster a couple days ago, earlier this week, and you're taking a look at it. It's pretty much a lot of the same, but just a couple of fringe guys here and there. Um, so, let's take a quick look at it so far. So you have Nathan Aspinall, Maxim Barbashev, Alex Belzile, Brett Berard, Anton Blid, who I think is gonna be a big piece for Hartford. I kind of wish he had worked out a little more in the NHL, but I mean the Rangers' depth is so big that a guy like him wouldn't exactly really fit. Um, did play a couple games in the NHL though with the Rangers, so it was pretty decent. Raul Bolliard, Johnny Brodzinski, Brett Bajel, Sam Carrick, Yaroslav Hemlar, Philip Hedel, Will Cooley. So that's list one. So this is just the forwards so far. Adam Edstrom, Adam Ernie, Johnny Evans, Bo Gruel, Blade Jenkins, Capo Caco, Ryder Korzak, Chris Kreider, Lexi Lafreniere, Jake Lasician, everyone's favorite cardio guy, Bryce McConnell Barker, and Blake McLaughlin. And then the last forward group is Riley Nash, Brennan Othman, Artemi Panarin, Matt Rempe, Dylan Rubrek, Riley Smith, Nate, and I apologize if I'm going to butcher this name, Nate Suchezi, okay, Adam Sikora, Vincent Trocheck, Callie Väisänen, Jimmy Vesey, and obviously Mika Zibanejad. So before I get into the forwards and defensemen, let's just point out some names here so far. So obviously the Rangers also had just participated in a prospect tournament with the Philadelphia Flyers not too long ago, a couple weeks back. And it seems like Adam Edstrom and I think Brennan Othman really sort of stuck out again. But this time Edstrom was really making his impact. So I think personally that Adam Edstrom might actually secure a spot on this team as fourth line, maybe third line, depending on how well he does. But I think he'll be here for the duration of the season because I mean, it seems like his game and his speed. You wouldn't think a guy like him, being like 6'8", 6'9", would really have some speed, but he can really book it. I was very impressed with just like the size and also just the maturation of his game. You saw him the first couple times in camp a couple of years ago. And, it just, yeah, he had really good stride, but he didn't really seem to kind of impress. But I'm glad that the Rangers organization stuck with him because clearly there's a lot of talent there. So Adam Edstrom is definitely one. Obviously, Philip Hedel, having a full season of him as your third line center is going to be key. Obviously, Sam Carrick, Johnny Brodzinski, Brett Berard is definitely going to be a name that I've talked about a lot. That's going to be one to consider. Someone mentioned, I think it might have been Dave in one of our chats, that basically said that, or somebody in our group chat had mentioned that Brett Berard or Brennan Othman are essentially one of them is going to be trade deadline fodder because and I'll touch on the whole recent article that came out with Larry Brooks. But it mentioned that the Rangers will have at least about $6 million in cap space. I think that was mentioned in Brooks's article. I could be wrong. I might be crossing up my sources, but I read somewhere that the Rangers will accrue about $6 million in cap space, and therefore it'll be another deadline where the Rangers will potentially be active in terms of trying to improve the team. And Drury has always been aware of that. So, and then, some of the other names, obviously Capo Caco, he's definitely, this is essentially another make or break season for him because, I mean, Alexis Lafreniere was able to make the leap last year. And, it seems like the team has given the players the resources and the coaching, the proper coaching to put them over the hump. So, hoping Capo Caco actually can do something. Ryder Korzak is a sleeper to me. So is Bryce McConnell Barker. Those guys are sleeper guys that could act as depth. But it's just essentially difficult when really the makeup of the team has already been formed. There's really just a couple of spots here and there that are essentially, toss ups. Um, so then you look at, you look at a guy like Dylan Rubrek. So this kid is tall. I think this kid's about 6'9", 6'10". He's a center. And credit to Jess Rubenstein on Twitter, who follows a lot of the Rangers prospects and does a really good job at, reporting about them. And he's really high on Rubrek. So I decided to take a look at him a little bit and also look at some of the stuff that he talked about him. And you got a big, somewhat skilled center down the middle that is a prospect in your system. How well will a lot of that translate into the NHL? And that remains to be seen. But I think with, the trend of, kind of that, the heavy sort of play that the Florida Panthers were described as, the like ESPN were shoving it down our throats basically every single day that, they profiled the Panthers. So I think the Rangers are looking to kind of get players like that in their system, to get players who can play that hard game, and that also applies to a guy like Berard and even in Adam Sikora. That's going to be a sleeper pick, so to speak. Is still a little raw. Um, Apparently plays the game like Brad Marchand, but I think if all goes according to plan, I think Adam Sikora, Dylan Rubrek, and even like Adam Edstrom, and even a guy like Matt Rempe can really be vital for this team. And speaking of Rempe was seen doing some skates across the ice, or he was doing some laps. And I'll tell you what, it seems like he's put in a little bit of work because he looks like he's a little bit more mobile than he was last year. And honestly, good for the kid because, it seems like he really wants to be here, and the fan base has embraced him wholeheartedly. And I think a guy like Rempe, who probably improved his fighting skills, but also just, it seems like he brings sort of an energy to the team that they don't really have when he's not there. I mean, granted, he's, a liability in some aspects. At least last year he was when it came to using your whole bench. But at the same time, the Rangers seem to play a little bit better. I wrote something about on the website in terms of like the effect of a player on their team, and I compared the Matt Rempe effect to Sean Avery. Now, if you remember, the Rangers had a phenomenal record. I mean, they were like, you know, I think they were 10 games over 500 with Sean Avery in the lineup because he just provided a spark. And, it's just one of those intangibles that you can't really quantify with like a stat. It just kind of seems like when you have somebody like that on your team, and even the same goes for when uh, Ryan Reeves recently, when he was somewhat useful out there, the Rangers played really well. I mean, Ryan Reeves was really a big part in keeping that 22 team together. That was a very close-knit team, and when they lost that, they really lost somebody in the clubhouse that could really bring the guys together. So I think maybe Rempe doesn't do it exactly like Reeves or Avery did, but it seems like Rempe is a rallying point, and there's a clear way for him, and that's just not only making the team out of camp, but there's also been a clear effort in just trying to make himself better, and I think that's key. You want guys like him who have that raw skill. The kid's a good skater. He could be better, of course. He lugs around the ice a little bit, but the kid can use his size for good. And, it's something that the Rangers have really lacked over the last couple of years. And having a guy like that who can net you a couple of goals here and there on your fourth line with a bunch of size, it's fantastic. And then obviously the rest of the team, Trocheck, VCs, Zibanejad, Kreider, Lafreniere, Panarin. We already know that. And Riley Smith also here donning the number 91. He'll more than likely take reps with, um, Zibanejad and Kreider. So we'll have to see how that turns out. He's a positive 5-on-5. That's what the Rangers have needed. They needed that in the playoffs, at least with against the Florida Panthers, and even in the Carolina Hurricanes series. So we'll see how Riley Smith plays out. Interesting to see what happens in the first couple preseason games with the Rangers and how Laviolette deploys his lineup. Now we take a look at the defense here. So we start with Carter Berger, Madison Bowie. Madison Bowie is an interesting name. Casey Fitzgerald, Adam Fox, of course. Ben Harper makes his valiant return back to the Rangers training camp. He was injured most of last year, but still on that team-friendly deal that he signed with the team about 2 seasons ago, and he's definitely been some pretty decent depth for the Rangers and also pretty good defensemen for Hartford. Blake Hillman, Zach Jones. Zach Jones is a key player here. He's definitely going to be in the NHL, but it all depends on whether he's able to beat out Robertson or Rubiedel for that final spot to essentially play with Jacob Trouba. Ryan Lindgren, of course, back on a 1-year deal, essentially a prove-it contract to see what the Rangers can offer him or what he can do. Last year was a bit of an anomaly. He kind of dropped off a lot. He was also hurt a lot, So we hope to see Lindgren get out there with a hopefully fully healthy Adam Fox. You want to try to avoid early season injuries that'll take you out for months. So hopefully Adam Fox doesn't have to deal with that again this season. Connor Mackey coming back. Connor Mackey, if pretty, fifth, sixth, seventh defenseman, pretty good for Hartford, but came up and essentially got into the fight that you could say saved the season because they were in Ottawa. Rangers look kind of flat. No coincidence that, Connor Mackey gets into that fight. And then the Rangers end up having one of their best stretches of the season. So that's definitely something to see. Victor Mancini, Case McCarthy, obviously Keandre Miller, Jake Murray, Chase Pauls, Matthew Robertson. So now here's the thing about Matthew Robertson. So the Rangers decided to tender him a contract. So I think this is probably the time that Robertson will have to prove that he can earn a spot on this team because I think he was drafted in 2019 or 2020, probably 2019 if I'm correct. And it just seems like all these years he hasn't been able to really make the leap yet in terms of being a solid guy. He's been passed up, by Zach Jones and by, Braden Schneider and Keandre Miller, and even Nils Lundqvist to a degree when Nils was here. So maybe now that he's matured a little bit, maybe Matthew Robertson is the one that finds that spot and ends up, becoming a key cog finally. Excuse me. Into the Rangers organization in terms of just being a decent depth piece. It just kind of seems like he hasn't really fulfilled his potential, but this is essentially it for him. And, you don't want to say that about a guy, but, Robertson has a lot of potential, still does, can be a really solid two-way defenseman, defensive defenseman. Really, I'm not really sure about like his offensive statistics. I should have looked that up before I started, but haven't really heard of him being kind of like an offensively dynamic player, but I do know he does have some skills for it. So there's that. Obviously, Chad Ruedel came back on a 1-year deal. Rangers traded for him in the deadline last year and seldomly used him for some odd reason, but when he did play, he was actually really good. So it's good to see that the Rangers decided to bring him back on a pretty cheap deal, so that'll definitely be depth for the major league team. And Chad Ruedel's won a Stanley Cup with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So that's pretty good. Brandon Scanlon, depth. Braden Schneider, of course. Ryan Seedham, Jacob Trouba. Now, I'm going to touch on Trouba in just a little bit because there seems to the Jacob Trouba discourse has reared its ugly head again this year with the recent article that Brooks just posted. So I'll get to that in a second. Noah Van Villiet, excuse me. And then you look at the goaltenders, obviously Talon. Oh, this one always tripped me up. Talon Boyko, Louis Domingue, Dylan Garand, Hugo Olas, Jonathan Quick, and Igor Shesterkin. So just really quick on the goaltenders. So basically this is Igor's contract year. And the salary cap is about as tight as ever. And, you want to keep him here. But if he ends up pricing himself out, I don't know if the Rangers should pay him that money. Look, I love Igor just as much as the next guy. I mean, I have his jersey for goodness sake. I think having a guy like that is vital and important to this franchise's success. You can't be, the team that they want to be without a solid tendy in net. Now, you can make the argument that guys like Matt Murray and Aiden Hill have won Stanley Cups, but the problem is that the way that the teams are set up are much different. So you can't expect the same result by bringing in like an Aiden Hill or like a Martin Jones for a team like the Rangers when those guys have played for teams that have just been absolute juggernauts. And it's not to say that the Rangers aren't good, but those teams were built to the core with some guys that they've had, and you can get away with having a less than stellar goaltender. Um, you know, uh, you look at Aiden Hill, for example. He was kind of like the fifth man in, but because Vegas had a lot of injuries at one point, and then they decided to keep him around. Um, the Rangers are just not built like that. The Rangers, at least the way the roster is constructed, is not a team that can, because then what would happen is that, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to um the Rangers and the way that the roster's put together. You look at a team like Vegas again, they have Jack Eichel as their top center. They have Alex Pietrangelo. They have that depth. They have that really top end. They had, even with the guy like Jonathan Marchessault, they had a lot of scoring options everywhere. So they were able to get away with having a subpar goaltender. They've had the strong defenses and have been able to be competitive. But the Rangers, on the other hand, not that they don't have any of that, but just the way that their style is just really relies heavily on the goaltender. And if you have sort of an average guy, it can really sink, the current, iteration of the Rangers. Maybe it changes in a couple years. Maybe, Gabriel Perreault comes in and just becomes a force and ends up being like a Connor McDavid-esque player where he can dominate on the ice with absolute, force. And maybe it's like that. But either way, just going back to Igor, if the Rangers pay him 10, fine. But anything above that is too much. But then you look at the rest of the goaltenders, and you have Jonathan Quick, of course. You know what you're getting with Jonathan Quick as your backup. Another reliable guy you can have around. He's got the playoff experience. He knows what he's doing. And he's kind of like a steady influence in the clubhouse, or in the locker room rather. Clubhouse, I'm thinking, but got baseball in the mind. And you know it's definitely insurance. And then you look at Louis Domingue. We all know the story about the pulled pork, but decent backup, has been solid for the Rangers, was able to come in on a pinch a few times last year when they needed him to do it, and he was fine. So he'd be good Hartford fodder, so to speak. Talon Boyko, not really too sure about him. I'm not sold on him as a goaltending prospect just yet. And then you got Dylan Garand and Hugo Olas. Dylan Garand's name has been popped around for so long that I sometimes tend to forget that he's still a prospect. And then Hugo Olas, I think that was one of also Benoit Allaire's own personal picks. But maybe Olas and Garand could end up becoming something if Igor ends up getting priced out, because they're going to have to rely on their goaltender. It's just kind of the New York Ranger way. This team has been blessed with solid goaltending for the past 25 years. So you'd want that tradition to continue, whether it's to keep Igor or use somebody else that can pick up the mantle. Salary cap era sucks, and it's really not fun. So that's just some of the people on the training camp roster that are at least notable to me in the sense that, they could potentially have an impact. And obviously we have something on that on the blog. So now moving on to the Jacob Trouba discourse. So obviously, with the training camp roster coming out earlier in the week, and then I think it was Monday of this week. This is being released on the 20th, so the 16th. If I'm getting my dates correct, I'm a little off right now, but so with hockey season getting ready to start, players on the ice, Larry Brooks had this sort of kind of bombshell article sometimes it's hard to take his sources correct because sometimes he can be wrong. Like I know, Nick mentioned this in the chat, and I do remember this. Larry Brooks essentially stood on the hill that uh, Derek Stepan would get traded, and lo and behold, ended up getting traded like almost literally not too long after. And I know I'm using that word somewhat incorrectly, but the article came out, and then literally either the next day or a couple hours later, uh, Stepan was traded in that pick in that trade for draft picks. So the report came out that obviously we already know that Jacob Trouba, once he found out that there were whispers of him getting traded to Detroit right before the list was supposed to be given, added Detroit to the list. And then it came out that he ended up having a bunch of suitors. Teams were willing to want to, you know, trade for him, and Chris Drury was looking to try and capitalize on using that cap space for the team. But he said, he used every right in his contract that he had to refuse a deal, and then also said that I think it was either from him or his agent that he wouldn't report to where ever he got traded. And it kind of sucks because then if you actually do end up trading him to a team that's not on his list and he doesn't report, well, then now the Rangers have to give up something extra in terms of compensation. And just compensation stuff always ends up sucking. And not in the sense of sucking as the talent that's going to come in and out is going to be bad. It's just, it's not a situation you want to really get yourself into in terms of management, or at least with the GM of the club, because why would you want to do that in the first place? And it's just also a really bad look too, when you trade your captain for essentially a bag of pucks and then does not show up to the team that he ended up getting traded to. It's just, it would just continue a lot of the mockery that ends up happening to just New York sports teams in general as of late. Have some of them deserved that sort of mockery? Of course they've had. Of course they have. But just generally speaking, New York teams tend to get a pretty bad rap, just because of the way the people are and whatever. So the benefit of the doubt never really comes in this situation. So that's just always the case. But with Trouba, understandably, people are upset. I can definitely understand why people would be upset because his play was less than stellar in the playoffs, especially that last series against the Panthers. I mean, he had that gaudy missed hit that turned into like a small 2-on-1, and the goal, rips it past the goaltender on a give and go. Uh, and then you have, just like him playing hurt. Like, I don't care what anyone says, and I've said this before, and I know I've repeated this ad nauseum in other podcasts, but if you break your ankle, you are not going to heal up in 12 days. And then he says, yeah, he was fine. Yeah, sure, but that still limits your mobility. And the fact that he already plays hurt as is, a lot of people, I don't know how much people remember, but when the whole thing happened with the helmet toss 2 years ago, at least in 23, and just kind of that whole time when things are really beginning to hit the fan in Rangerstown, right, almost right before Gerard Grant lost his job, at that time, you know, um, it just it's just he was playing hurt, like he was playing with a busted wrist. So what ended up happening is he was trying to clear the puck and he couldn't get it out, so it would result with him and Miller kind of being hung up in their own zone. And Keandre Miller is still somewhat raw. He's definitely gotten a heck ton better in terms of just his defensive positioning and coverage and just like his overall approach to the game defensively. But before, he would essentially have to make up for Jacob Trouba's mistakes, and that would end up, sort of like an extra thing on his part. So the only thing you can really do, as annoying as it is, you want the Rangers to have that money, and Chris Drury knows that the team that had this player, he really wanted to make a change. I mean, he was able to get rid of Barclay Goodrow without problem. Granted, he might have colluded a little bit with San Jose. I'm not trying to make an accusation, but it's just not a coincidence that San Jose ends up just putting in a claim on him somehow. They were, Mike Greer worked for the Rangers under Chris Drury. So, I wouldn't be surprised, and there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, they didn't break law. They just want to put this guy on, you want to claim him, and it just so happened that San Jose had the first claim, you know. So I can't really fault Chris Drury too much on that because Drury knew that he needed to make an improvement, and he was able to yeet Goodrow quick and was gonna do the same for Trouba, and then Trouba decided to use his power in his contract around the 1st of July and just kind of really handcuff this team. And it's not to say that the team's not going to be good, but you have to really shelter him. And it has to take a look, excuse me. And you have to take a look at just the construction of the roster. And it is essentially the same outside of Sam Carrick and Riley Smith and a couple other guys. So one would have to wonder if the Rangers were actually going to trade Jacob Trouba, And granted, I understand why he did it, but if they were to do it, he's probably going to go to a team that he'd be familiar with, and really help this club in terms of cap space. Because I mean, let's be honest, Jacob Trouba has not played like an 8 million defenseman, but at the same time, I'm not going to fault the guy for doing what's best for him and his family. His wife having the medical residency that was pushed back a year. So I'm not gonna sit here and like get on the guy. It's just as a hockey thing, it's annoying because it's essentially dead cap. Except you're actually getting used to the dead cap, and the dead cap can probably make a couple of plays and score a couple of goals for you. So I understandably can get why people would be mad, especially after the Brooks article came out, that people would want to vilify him. But at the end of the day, the guy's still wearing a Rangers jersey. He's your captain, and I think honestly it'd be foolish to boo him. Athletes are selfish by nature. They play a high intensity sport and they want to make sure they get compensated for the work that they put in. And unless you're like Shohei Ohtani, who essentially just runs and hits, there's a lot of aspects of a game that players have to manage. And I just, he's going to be a Ranger for this year at least. So if you want to boom, fine. I don't understand it. I don't agree with it. It's not my thing. But I can understand why people would be upset. But then I also understand why Jacob Trouba did it in the first place. He's got his family's interest at heart. You want him, everybody would essentially do the same thing if they were put in that situation. You're going to tell me that, you're going to try and move me out of a place that, I'm sure he likes playing here, So you think he's just going to want to give that up all because, the team wants to spend money? I don't think so. But it's been an interesting last couple of days in Rangers Twitter. Obviously with the football season beginning to start, I'm actually recording this the night after the Jets beat the New England Patriots, so that's nice. And then obviously baseball gearing into playoff mode. The Mets are doing well and the Yankees are doing well. Hockey is slowly finding its way through the news, and obviously with the Rangers training camp starting this week, we'll just have to see what happens. But anyways, like I said, this could potentially be the final, I guess, solo pod that I do, because the next time, which would usually be in about a week, I think some preseason games would have started already. And by then, hopefully, we'll be able to have the full crew here with, behind the mics and ready to go. And then we'll continue to give you the best coverage that we can for this upcoming season. We'll be able to, we'll get the questions. Hopefully, Rob will be back, Becky, Dave, myself, of course, Nick. We're just looking to try and, get the ball rolling again. It'd be nice to hear from all those crazy cats again, like the little banter that we have before and after. It's something I missed. But some people decided to take the summer off. Some people just decided to take a social media break. To each their own. You do what you got to do, and this will be here waiting for you. So hope to have that soon enough. And that pretty much wraps up this episode of Live from the Blue Seat. So continue to listen to the podcast, continue to read our content on the blog. I just ran the preseason pieces rather, and hoping to have a couple of retrospectives of some players soon enough, of just some of the goals they scored as a New York Ranger. So anyways, hopefully you all have a wonderful, wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or wherever you listen to this. And don't forget, let's go Rangers.